Good evening, einen wunderschönen guten Abend. Herzlich willkommen zum Internationalen Literaturfestival, dem 22. seiner Art, liebes Publikum. Toll, dass Sie da sind und sich jetzt auf die Welt von Engeln und Heiligen einlassen wollen mit Eliot Weinberger. Eliot, welcome again to Berlin.
Thank you.
I guess this festival is something like your second living room or something? Is it?
Home. Yes.
Eliot Weinberger kommt wirklich seit Jahren und ich habe ihn gerade gefragt, ob er wirklich von Anfang an dabei war bei diesem Festival. Also 18 Mal glaubt er ungefähr von diesen 22 Jahren dabei gewesen zu sein. Und für unterschiedliche Dinge, politische Debatten, Nachdenken über die Zeit oder natürlich um seine Essays, Gedanken, lyrischen Gedanken vorzustellen. Ich werde ein paar Worte über ihn verlieren am Anfang, aber was mich eigentlich am meisten erst einmal interessiert, lieber Eliot, und im Übrigen sitzen wir ja hier nicht zu zweit, sondern auch mit der wunderbaren Beatrice Faßbender, meine Damen und Herren, die ich Ihnen auch gleich noch ein bisschen vorstellen werde, aber diese Neugierde ist einfach unglaublich in deinem Lebenswerk. Where did this fundamental curiosity about almost everything actually the world has to offer come from, Eliot?
Oh, okay. Sorry.
First question.
Oh, okay. Where does my curiosity come from?
Yeah.
I don't know. It came from a cat. No, I find that most of my essays are propelled by either curiosity or indignation, and the literary essays by curiosity and the political essays by indignation. And what I like to do is, when I'm writing about politics, I usually write about American politics, and when things are truly terrible in the United States, I also like to have a project where I'm writing about something that's timeless and that where I can follow my curiosity. So during the Iraq War and after 9/11, that's when I was writing my book, An Elemental Thing, Das Wesentliche. Good.
Hey.
And,
Good.
and then during the Trump years, I needed a break from reading the news, and so that's when I started researching about angels and saints.
And let me tell them some words in German, liebes Publikum. Dieses Engel- und Heiligen-Thema ist wirklich faszinierend. Ich habe jetzt gelernt, ob es 301.655.722 Engel gibt oder auch doch eher 600 Millionen. Die Zahlen schwanken, je nachdem, welche Quelle man befragt. Aber wenn man Eliot Weinberger traut und dieses Buch liest, dann scheinen sie omnipräsent in allen möglichen Kulturen und Kulturgeschichten. Und darüber werden Sie heute ein wenig mehr lernen. Eliot Weinberger, Jahrgang 1949 in New York, geboren, preisgekrönter Essayist, Übersetzer, auf Deutsch erschienen seine Essays vor allem im Lettre International. Gibt eigentlich gar kein Thema, das ihn nicht interessieren könnte, deswegen fragte ich gleich nach der Neugierde. Den Eindruck hat man auch ganz schnell, wenn man seine Essays liest, ob über Nacktmullen oder ausgestorbene Vögel Neuseelands oder über Indien, über die Farbe Blau oder mittelalterliche Buchtitel aus China oder aber den Sternenhimmel. Also es gibt wirklich kein Thema, würde ich denken zumindest, was er nicht in seiner ganz eigenen Art und Weise aufgreift. Und die Kunst, das zu übersetzen in eine andere Sprache, was Eliot auf Englisch in einem ganzen Kosmos sozusagen ausdrückt, die beherrscht Beatrice Faßbender und dafür bewundere ich sie sehr, muss ich sagen. Beatrice Faßbender kennen Sie sicherlich und möglicherweise ist ja auch ein Bestandteil dieses Festivals immer wieder gewesen und hat viele Gedichtbände von unterschiedlichsten AutorInnen übersetzt, aber eben auch die Essays von Eliot Weinberger und auch Priya Basil und den Roman All unsere Jahre von Kathy Page. Also da gibt es ganz, ganz viele und 2014 erschien die von ihr herausgegebene Anthologie New York, eine literarische Einladung. Ich freue mich sehr, liebe Beatrice, wir kennen uns schon aus vielen anderen Zusammenhängen, dass du heute dabei bist, denn du beackerst gerade tatsächlich dieses Buch. Bei Beerenberg wird es nämlich erschienen im kommenden Jahr auf Deutsch. Ist es schwierig, die Übersetzung der Engel und der Heiligen? Wie ist es so? Wie fasst sich's an?
Nee, fasst sich super an, wie jeder Text von Eliot. I'm just telling them that it's such great fun to translate you.
What should she say?
What should I say? Well, you don't know what I said in German. Nein, es gibt kaum Autoren, glaube ich, die so vermeintlich schlicht und wahnsinnig elegant schreiben und also die eigentliche Arbeit ist eigentlich eher vielleicht noch so ein bisschen Recherche, wie bestimmte Namen, also von diesen Heiligen, von denen wir hier lesen werden, wie die vielleicht auf Deutsch heißen oder solche Sachen. Manchmal muss man ein paar Details recherchieren, aber sprachlich ist es eine einzige Freude.
Yeah, and I mean, the problem with Beatrice is she always finds mistakes in the English. And so, including 5 minutes ago, she said, we're about to read this text, and she said, by the way, you know, there's a typographical error in there. So, it's always very
translator,
intimidating.
you're a nerd, of course.
It's very intimidating to be translated by Beatrice because she always finds mistakes. So.
I'm sorry.
She's a good editor. Ja, und Beatrice Faßbender kennt auch das Werk von Eliot Weinberger fantastischerweise durch das Übersetzen, aber sie hat auch eine Laudatio gehalten, als er den Schockenpreis bekam, vor kurzer Zeit erst, und hat sich da auch nochmal ganz pointiert mit seinem Werk auseinandergesetzt. Und es heißt in einer Verlagsankündigung zu Eliot Weinbergers Schreibe, scheinbar entfernteste Dinge zusammenzuführen, zu entziffern und poetisch zu deuten, das ist die Kraft von Eliot Weinberger. In der Tat, er hat die Gabe, das, was sich am Rande des Weges so zeigt, zu erzählen, zu erschließen, darüber zu philosophieren und seinen anderen Blick auf Details und die Welt zu offenbaren. Und ich fand es sehr interessant, er hat sich mal mit einer Seegurke verglichen. Ich dachte mir, Seegurke, warum jetzt eigentlich das? Und jetzt muss ich fragen, ob Sea Cucumber wirklich die richtige Translation ist. You once compared yourself to a sea cucumber, seems to be the right word in English. Okay, to which you dedicated an essay. So what do a sea cucumber and an Eliot Weinberger have in common?
Well, I'm not edible. Okay, yeah, that was a long time ago, but I guess I once compared what I was. Sea cucumbers are those creatures, they're also called holothurians, that live at the bottom of the sea, and they ingest lots and lots of mud to get little bits of nourishment. And so that's, I kind of identified with that, you know, as my totemic animal, you know. But I mean, they're basically kind of a mouth and an anus, but I don't know.
Well, who knows? Maybe in your next life, or
but the
life.
Chinese eat it though. It's not. I don't know.
Well,
I don't. It's not one of my favorite things, but you know.
At the beginning of your authorship, there was poetry, actually. I read you translated it from various languages and published it. Why poetry? What does poetry have to do with your own writing today? But what did it used to be for you in the beginning?
Well, it still is, but I mean, basically, I kind of did the self-education as a poet. I started out by translating poetry in high school, and as a way of learning how to write poetry. And I always thought that translation is really one of the best ways to learn how to write, because you're dealing with the nuts and bolts of how a line of poetry is written, how a line of prose is written, without all the psychological interference, like this is a poem about breaking up with my girlfriend or the death of my grandmother or something. So you can really get into the mechanics of writing So I started out by translating poetry just for myself in high school, and then very early on started working with Octavio Paz and translating his poetry. And then I kind of went through the Ezra Pound school of what you need to know to be a poet, which is reading all the English language poets in chronological order and learning a little Provençal to read the troubadours and a little Italian to read Dante and so forth, and Chinese, of course. And then about around age 30, I thought, well, I'm kind of a lousy poet, but I could use what I had learned to write prose. And so that's pretty much when I started writing prose, and writing prose like poetry. And in other words, listening to it, trying to have very condensed images and so forth and so on in a kind of compressed prose. So that's pretty much
that
it.
Became
and recently,
your unique sound, actually.
Yeah. So I mean, sometimes they don't. Sometimes I mean, I consider what I do essays because they're all verifiable information. I don't make up anything. I don't blur the lines between fiction and nonfiction. But sometimes they look like poems on the page, and so some people consider them poems and some people consider them essays, but I consider them essays.
Eliot, you published a book about stars on the starry sky shortly before this book.
Mm-hmm.
So are these two essays related in any way?
What, the angels and the stars?
Yeah, angels are also referred to as celestial beings.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's any connection particularly with that. The angels book started out because 25 years ago I wrote a one-paragraph essay on angels, and then I thought I would expand it. This was just about how many years ago? 5 years ago. So then I started researching angels, and it just got larger and larger and larger. I mean, what's curious about angels is that everything we know about angels is pretty much not in the Bible, and it all happens after the Bible. And for example, what angels look like. I mean, if we try to envision angels, we think of these sort of androgynes or young women with wings, or they're chubby babies with wings. That's not in the Bible at all. In the Bible, the few times they're described, they're good-looking young men. There's one scene where Abraham goes to Sodom with two angels to try and find a just man, and the Sodomites find these angels really hot, and so they try to seduce them. And then there's one angel, the angel that appears to John the Baptist's mother, is described as having a terrible countenance. And then there's two young men. When Jesus is resurrected, there's either, depending which gospel you read, there's either two young men dressed in white roll the stone away, or the people roll the stone away, and inside is one or two young men also dressed in white who are the angels. So basically, in the Bible, the angels, they appear 200 times. You know what they do, but you don't know anything about them. So then what happens is that, particularly with the institutionalization of the church, then they start talking about, what are the angels like? And what's very curious about it is that, unlike any other religion, everyone is obsessed with the material reality of these supernatural beings. So, do they eat? What do they eat? All of these kinds of questions. I have a list. I was trying to make a list of all of these questions. And the great text for this is Thomas Aquinas's Summa Theologica, which is 3,000 pages long, hundreds of pages of which are devoted to all of these questions which he lays out. I mean, it's really like a postmodernist novel. You have these questions, and he lays out the pros and the cons before he makes his own decision. And then I was just writing down. Can I do this? I was just writing down some of the questions that people had. For example, do they have bodies or not? Because are they incorporeal or are they made of something? Because only God can be completely incorporeal. So Augustine said, no, they have assumed bodies so that they could talk to people. Do they eat? Because there's a scene in the Bible where they share dinner with Abraham. And so then the question is, if they're incorporeal beings, how do they eat?
Very
practical
question.
So then some people say, no, they're pretending to eat. But if they're pretending to eat, it means that they are deceiving. And if they're and obviously angels can't deceive, only demons can deceive. So how do you get around that? Do they have any sensory organs? And if they don't, which they don't because they're incorporeal, how do they speak to people? And then how do they speak to each other? Can they see or experience anything? Do they have memories? And because Aristotle, who they're all citing, believed that memory is dependent on experience. So if they don't experience anything, how can they have any memories? Do they occupy space? That's the classic, the Protestants parodied that as how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. Aquinas said that they can travel instantaneously from one place to another, kind of like Star Trek, they get beamed up. But the question is, if they're going from point A to point C, do they cross point B? Can two angels be in the same place at the same time? That's like how many can dance on the head of a pin. Do they think? Do they know anything? Do they have individual personalities? In the Bible, when people, as part of sort of desert hospitality, when they ask the angels their names, the angels refuse to answer. And then I think it was Aquinas said, well, that's because their names are too complicated for humans to understand. Do they have a will? And if they don't, how did they revolt against God? And the famous when Satan leads the angels against God. So, I mean, these are all of these questions, which is, I think it's really unique for any religion because, Hindus don't ask, well, if Vishnu has 4 arms, which hand does he use to brush his teeth, Or, how come, okay, Krishna's blue, but, how did he really get blue, or what's this blue made of, But so you have, Christianity for really up until modern times, from Augustine until modern times, they're having very heavy debates about all of these questions, which
It's true, absolutely, but. In my imagination, especially angels are connotated being a very Christian subject. What about Jewish angels?
No, there's Jewish angels, but I think the Jews. I don't know all that much about Judaism, but there are Jewish angels, and then there's a big question about how many angels there are too. But there's in the Jewish tradition. God creates angels with every breath he exhales, which is a lot of angels. But then it also raises the question: God breathes.
So many questions.
In which case, he could take up smoking because it wouldn't kill him. There are wonderful Jewish demons called the Shadim, which I don't really know all that much about. But the one thing about these demons is that they're constantly rubbing up against you, and it explains why, something you've always wanted to know, why Jewish scholars who just sit there reading a book all the time, why their clothes are so shabby. It's because the shadim are always rubbing up against them. So
But tell me, Eliot, before we are going to start a small passage from the book to read, what's the difference between an angel and a saint?
Oh, well, yeah, but I mean,
you deal with both, actually.
Yeah, no, well, saints are, of course, humans, and angels are celestial, supernatural beings.
So this is easy. Okay.
So, yeah, though it gets a little fuzzy with the archangel Michael, because for reasons I can't understand, Michael is also a saint. And so he's the patron saint of medieval warriors. And it's a little unclear why Michael is a saint, but he's one of I think there's only 2 angels that are actually named in the Bible, which is Michael and Gabriel. Gabriel, of course, is the Annunciation, tells Mary that she's pregnant, and Michael shows up in the Book of Revelations. But that's the difference.
So we see there's a lot to tell about angels and saints, and let's just listen to the book. You will just read in English and Beatrice in German.
Okay. So yeah. So the first half of this book is devoted to angels, and goes through a lot of this stuff, and then a lot of other things too. And then the second half of the book is about saints. So what happened is that after I was doing all this research about angels, then of course I ended up reading about saints all the time. And there's actually 10,000, I mean literally 10,000 saints that have been canonized by the church. So I went through an encyclopedia of saints, all 10,000 of them, but I would see, this guy looks interesting, and then I would, research further. But the church, though, actually up until around 1900, there aren't that many canonized saints. There's, 700 or 800. But then in the 20th century, I think standards have lowered, and they've put in, over 9,000 saints, because they suddenly decided any priest who was killed in China in the Revolution or in the Mexican Revolution, they all became saints. And then there were always these terrible stories of some 10-year-old girl in Italy who went to church every Sunday, but then was brutally murdered, and so they made her a saint too. So I mean, you used to have to perform miracles or be a martyr in the early years of Christianity, or your tomb became the site of miracles for you to be canonized. But now it's gotten pretty crazy. So we're going to read. So basically, the second half of the book is biographies of saints. Many of these biographies are only one sentence long.
Although there's so much to tell about those
There's
people,
a lot to tell. Because, I really like short biographies. I never understood these 1,000-page biographies all the time. So most of the biographies are 1 to 4 pages, I guess. And then I have a long series of short biographies that throughout this section. So we're going to, first Beatrice is going to read in German the biography of a saint from Ireland, Columba, and then we're going to read some of these brief lives, and then I'm going to read the life of a very recently canonized saint. Good?
Okay,
Okay.
good plan. Columban, Irland, gestorben 597. Er sah einen jungen Mönch an einem Fluss sitzen und ein Buch lesen. Und er sagte dem jungen Mönch, sein Buch werde ins Wasser fallen. Und so geschah es. Er prophezeite unerwarteten Besuch, die Regentschaft von Königen, das plötzliche Erscheinen von Walen im Meer, die Zukunft von Kindern, denen er begegnete, und den Ausgang von Schlachten. Er konnte nach hinten sehen. Er konnte Abschriften heiliger Bücher korrigieren, ohne einen Blick auf sie zu werfen. Beim Singen klang seine Stimme normal für jene, die neben ihm saßen, doch war sie eine Meile weit zu hören. Er wusste, dass ein böser Mann mit der eigenen Mutter geschlafen hatte. Jahre bevor die Nachricht eintraf, wusste er, dass eine Stadt in Italien von einem Vulkan zerstört worden war. Er wusste, dass ein Priester unrein war, sagte jedoch nicht, in welcher Weise. Er bat nicht Kronan, den Dichter zu singen, denn er wusste, der Dichter würde in jener Nacht von Banditen ermordet werden. Er wusste, dass Guer, der stärkste Mann in ganz Dariara, von einem vertrauten Gefährten getötet werden würde, doch sagte er Guer nicht, dass der Gefährte sein Messer war, das ihm bei einem Unfall entgleiten würde. Er wusste, ein verwundeter Reiher würde auf ihrer Insel landen, und als man ihn fand, wies er die Mönche an, ihn gesund zu pflegen. Er stand im Sonnenlicht und wusste, dass ein Sturm aufzog. Er wusste, dass ein Junge namens Colman Uabriun beim Melken der Kühe nicht das Kreuz geschlagen hatte und der Teufel sich am Boden seines Milcheimers verbarg. Mit einem Segen konnte er Seuchen heilen und gebrochene Knochen kurieren und den Geburtsschmerz lindern. Er konnte starke Winde und hohe Wellen abflauen lassen. Mit einem Gebet stimmte er die Frau von Luine, dem kleinen Hammer, um, die ihren Mann verabscheute und nicht mit ihm schlief. Lange nach seinem Tod, während einer großen Dürre, trug man seine Tunika auf die Felder und schüttelte sie dreimal, dann regnete es. Sein Biograf, Adomnan von Iona, schrieb ein Jahrhundert später, er habe dank göttlicher Gnade mehrere Male eine wundersame Ausweitung seines Geistesvermögens erlebt, sodass er in einem einzigen Sonnenstrahl die ganze Welt zu sehen schien. In seiner Kindheit wurde, während er schlief, über seinem Kopf ein schwebender Lichtball gesehen.
Okay. So we're going to read a section of these brief lives, and we're going to alternate instead of repeating. So I'll read one section in English, Beatrice in German. And so if you don't understand the German, you'll have to buy the book to find out what happened. Or the book will be out in German next year, right?
Next year.
We hope.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Okay. Brief Lives number 1. Datus, Italy, 2nd century. He became Bishop of Ravenna after a dove miraculously appeared above him, but it is doubtful that he existed.
Genesius von Arles, Frankreich, gestorben 303 oder 308. Der Körper des enthaupteten Märtyrers wurde in Frankreich begraben. Sein Kopf aber wurde in den Händen von Engeln nach Spanien gebracht, wo er zum Schutz gegen schuppiges Haar angerufen wird.
Maybe I'll read that one in English for people who don't know. This is Genesius of Arles. France, died 303 or 308. A decapitated martyr, his body was buried in France, but his head was transported in the hands of angels to Spain, where he is invoked as a protection against dandruff. Zoilus, Spain, died 304. A young man martyred in Cordoba, he was vengeful after death. On his feast day, an oblivious woman who was spinning found her right hand paralyzed, and a skeptical blacksmith mutilated himself with his glowing tongs. At the monastery named for him, animals that nibbled the monks' crops dropped dead.
Pelagia von Antiochia, Syrien, gestorben um 311. Sie war ein zügelloses Tanzmädchen, das konvertierte, nach Jerusalem zog, als Einsiedlerin auf dem Ölberg lebte und als der bartlose Mönch bekannt war, dessen Geschlecht erst entdeckt wurde, als sie starb. Oder sie war eine Schülerin des heiligen Lucian, die sich mit 15 Jahren vom Dach ihres Hauses stürzte, um Einkerkerung und Vergewaltigung zu entgehen, als Soldaten nach ihr ausgesandt wurden. Der heilige Johannes Chrysostomos feierte die göttliche Inspiration ihres Mutes. Der heilige Augustinus aber sagte, Selbstmord sei nicht gestattet, auch nicht unter solchen Umständen.
Martin of Tours, France, died 397. As bishop, he ordered the sacred groves to be chopped down, for, quote, there is nothing religious in a tree trunk.
Synkletika von Alexandria, Ägypten, 4. Jahrhundert. Sie schnitt sich das Haar ab und lebte fortan in einer ungenutzten Gruft, bis sie mit 84 Jahren starb, obwohl es heißt, sie habe sich von Gott verlassen gefühlt.
Paul the Simple, Egypt, 4th century. At 60, he discovered his wife in bed with a neighbor and left his farm to become a desert hermit. His nickname came from his childlike demeanor.
Onofrios, Ägypten, 4. oder 5. Jahrhundert. Er lebte 70 Jahre lang in der Wüste, gekleidet allein in sein langes Haupt- und Barthaar, ernährt, womöglich von Engeln.
Proterius, Egypt, died 457. In the schism between the Coptic Orthodox and Greek Orthodox churches, he replaced Dioscorsus as Patriarch of Alexandria, was lynched by an angry mob on Good Friday, his body dismembered and burnt, and was replaced by Timothy the cat.
Brigida von Kildare, Irland, gestorben 523. Sie pflegte ihren Mantel an einen Sonnenstrahl zu hängen.
I like that one. Bridget of Kildare, she used to hang her cloak on a ray of sun. Sigismund of Burgundy, France, died 524. A king, he murdered his own son, but repented.
Ailby von Emly, Irland, gestorben 528. Er konnte eine Wolke in 100 Pferde verwandeln.
Severus of Androca, Italy, died circa 530. Arriving too late to administer the last rites, he brought the man back to life again so he could then die properly.
Vedast, Frankreich, gestorben ca. 540. Er ließ eine Gans wieder auferstehen.
Tailo, Wales, died 560. He was admired as the founder of churches and monasteries in Penally, Llandaff, and Llandeilo. At his death, all three places claimed him. They decided to ask Jesus which should house his remains. And the next day, 3 identical corpses appeared so that each could have one.
David, Wales, ca. 500 bis ca. 589. Er hatte die Gabe der Zungenrede und als er von Wales nach Jerusalem pilgerte, brauchte er auf dem Weg keinen Übersetzer.
Tigris, France, 6th century. From her pilgrimage to the Holy Land, she brought back the finger of John the Baptist. Okay, so I'm going to read you. Thanks. I'm going to read a longer one. It's not that long, but it's like 3 pages. About a who was a saint who was actually canonized after the book came out. So she's a very recent saint. Edvige Carboni, who was from Italy, and she lived from 1880 to 1952. And this is her story. On the day she was born, her mother had a vision of a luminous host in a monstrance. A few days later, the baby developed a lump on her chest in the form of a cross. At 5, she took a vow of chastity, which she repeated daily for the rest of her life. Friends reported that, as a child, when she prayed, her room would be filled with a blinding light, in which could be seen the figures of saints and angels. To help her mother, who was ill, she left school after 3rd grade. Sent out at night to buy food, her guardian angel would accompany her and wait outside the store, so she would not be afraid. At 15, she wanted to become a nun, but she had to care for her large family. Nevertheless, Jesus chose her to be a victim soul. That's the nuns who suffer because of the sins of mankind. Jesus chose her to be a victim soul, as St. John Bosco himself told her in a vision, quote, to repair for so many offenses that he constantly receives, especially because of immodest fashion, and for there to be peace among nations. The Virgin Mary told her, quote, my daughter, promise me to suffer all tribulation, rejection, scorn, and sufferings for the conversion of communists. St. John Bosco appeared again in 1941 and said, my little daughter, remember that you have offered yourself as victim for the liberation of poor Russians from Bolshevism, sworn enemy to God. Pray so that soon the crucified one can enter Russia. An angel placed a crown of thorns on her head, and for a few days she could not open her eyes. She received the transverberation. An angel wounded her heart, and one could see the skin over it blistered, radiating in intense heat. Her nightshirts had burn marks on them. She received the stigmata, but she asked Jesus to remove it so that she could continue working. She levitated while in prayer. The devil tormented her. He scratched her, threw stones at her head, kicked her legs so hard she could barely walk, even took the gold fillings from her teeth. He broke dishes, mirrors, and windows, and scattered her flour, pasta, and polenta on the floor. He poured water on her bed, but the Virgin Mary herself dried it out. He undid her knitting. Once, she wrote, he, quote, grabbed my bag and took the 100 lira that I had to go shopping. He took the money and turned it into ashes. But her guardian angel helped her. Although she was barely literate, he dictated the letters she wrote, some of them in Latin. He made the beds when she was ill and cooked for her. One day, Jesus came to help with the laundry. He doesn't help you. She said he only pretended to wash the clothes, but had not touched them. He commanded it, and the clothes became white and folded. During the Second World War, the Virgin Mary came to her weeping. She explained, quote, I am crying because I cannot appease the anger of my son against the human race. If men don't do penance, the war will not end and much blood will be spilled. My daughter, immodest fashions and dishonesty have enraged God. Soldiers who died in the war, one of them a Russian, came to her and asked her to pray for them. A teacher who was killed in a bombing told her that she only needed one more Mass to be liberated from purgatory. A priest who gave lectures at the University of Rome denying the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist, and for whom she used to pray forgiveness, came to her after his death. He told her that he had been condemned because of the books he had written against the faith. To prove that this vision was not her imagination, he picked up a book in her room and it burst into flames. In August 1941, Jesus took her to visit heaven. She wrote, quote, I went walking up to a beautiful gate which had 2 angels, one on each side guarding it. The gate had a sign which read, those who are dishonest and immodest cannot enter. The angels made me enter. I happily entered. It was a piece of heaven. How beautiful, plants and flowers I had never seen before. The floor was covered with pearls and precious flowers, and everyone was singing happily. During the war, when things were scarce, Jesus gave her some shoes and a skirt. St. John Bosco brought her a half a kilo of rice, and St. Dominic Savio brought her coffee. She had the gift of bilocation, being in two places at the same time. She traveled with St. Sebastian to a town far away in Italy where a man was about to commit suicide. In another town, she persuaded a dying man to accept the last rites. During the war, she twice visited Cardinal Messenzi in prison in Hungary. Jesus took her to visit Monsignor Cuthbert O'Gara, Passionist bishop of Nanking, who had been imprisoned by the communists in China. As she hovered above them, out of reach, the guards screamed, "She is the witch of the Pope. She is a witch." She went to Moscow during the war and entered Stalin's room in the Kremlin. She said he had such an ugly stare that it made you afraid to look at him, and that he was shaking his fists saying, "I am the strong and terrible enemy of God." She told him, "You have to convert, but if you want to be God's eternal enemy, you will be." But he responded, "I will never convert. I will be God's enemy forever." She wrote in her diary, quote, "While I was praying in front of the crucifix, a person appeared to me suddenly all in flames, and I heard a voice say, 'I am Benito Mussolini.' The Lord has allowed me to come to you in order to get some relief from my sufferings in purgatory. I beg you as an act of charity to offer for me all your prayers, sufferings, and humiliations for 2 years, if your director allows it. God's mercy is infinite, but so is his justice. One cannot enter heaven until one has paid the last penny of the debt owed to divine justice. Purgatory is terrible for me because I waited until the last moment to repent." Some years later, she wrote, "On a spring day in 1951, Jesus told me after Holy Communion, quote, 'This morning the soul of Benito Mussolini has entered into heaven.'" She died in 1952. In 1968, the process toward her beatification began with the investigation by the Diocese of Rome. In 1994, Pope John Paul II named her a servant of God, and the case was turned over to the Congregation for the Causes of Saints. They ruled nihil obstat, nothing against. In 2017, Pope Francis named her as venerable, and in 2018, he approved a miracle attributed to the intercession of the venerable servant of God, Edvige Carboni, the final step before beatification, and she has now officially become a saint.
Thank you so much. Eliot Weinberger. Where did you find this story, for example?
Yeah, well, I mean, the interesting thing about when you're researching the Catholic Church is that religions that have a long tradition of monks, a monastic tradition of monks copying things, have been wonderful on the internet. And so all of the texts and all the hagiographies and everything is has all been, like this kind of monastic tradition has now translated to the internet. So it's interesting, Catholicism, Tibetan Buddhism are great if you're researching on the internet. I mean, they have all the texts, everything, whereas Hinduism is terrible, and things like that. So it's curious. I just want to say something about guardian angels. Yeah. Because guardian angels also don't exist in the Bible. And what's very curious in Christianity is that they'll take something said in past. Well, first of all, they'll take things said in passing in the Old Testament as proof of events that will actually happen in the New Testament with the coming of Jesus. But they also will take things said totally in passing, and the whole concept of the guardian angel comes from one line that Jesus said, where he says that you should love children because in heaven their angels watch over them. So it's just from that pronoun, their angels, that then in subsequent centuries they invented this whole idea of guardian angels. Then, of course, they start debating, well, who gets guardian angels? Is it only baptized people, or does everybody get them, and so forth? And then they start debating, well, if angels have had no experience, how can they really advise you on what you should be doing, you know? And then there's this question, well, how do they simultaneously serve God and, you know, help you, and can, you know, going back and forth. And then the best story about guardian angels that I came across was Pope John the 23rd, who said when he has to deal with somebody who's difficult, who he knows is going to be difficult in something or other, what he does is he talks to his guardian angel and then asks his guardian angel to talk to the other guy's guardian angel so that they can work it out. You know, it's like The Godfather, you know? It's fantastic.
Great stories. Let me just ask Beatrice. Beatrice, beim Übersetzen, du sagtest, das eine oder andere muss dann doch nochmal irgendwie nachrecherchiert werden, damit du verstehst, worum es geht. Was sind denn das dann für Quellen? Ja? Also bei den Heiligen scheint es ja ein bisschen einfacher zu sein als bei den Engeln, oder?
Das Internet.
What?
Das habe ich mir fast gedacht.
Nee, genau, nee, where do I do some research if I need to research? But ich habe tatsächlich, ich erinnere mich gerade an einen Text, der in dem Band Vogelgeister dann erschienen ist. Da ging es, ich weiß nicht mehr genau, worum es ging, ich weiß allerdings noch, dass es so kleine Auszüge aus einem größeren Text waren, wo dann Teile sozusagen ausgelassen waren, und da war es, das Grammatikalische ist ja manchmal dann so schwierig. Im Englischen kommt man oft, da muss man sich ja nicht unbedingt für einen Fall entscheiden oder so, aber im Deutschen muss man sich immer entscheiden. Das heißt, ich muss den Kontext wissen, um nachher für so 2 Wörter oder so zu wissen, die sind jetzt im richtigen Fall. Und genau, und da weiß ich noch, da habe ich dann diesen Originaltext und eine deutsche Übersetzung oder irgendwas im Internet gefunden, und das macht sehr viel Spaß.
Das kann ich mir vorstellen, ein sehr lebenslanges Lernen. Also jeder Essay von Eliot eröffnet dann nochmal andere Welten in Sphären, von denen man nicht mal ahnt möglicherweise, dass es sowas geben könnte. Deswegen haben Sie, liebes Publikum, jetzt auch die Möglichkeit, Fragen zu stellen, wenn Sie es denn möchten. Es gibt ein Saalmikrofon. Irgendetwas, was Sie schon immer mal über Heilige und Engel wissen wollten? Angeregt durch die Lektüre, die wir gerade hier gehört haben, möglicherweise auch. Sie können ja noch mal eine Runde nachdenken, ob das so ist.
No, but I mean, just to follow up there,
Yeah.
I should say that Beatrice is the only translator who ever asked me a question. So I don't know, all the other translators, they just like plow right ahead. I don't know. Or
Whatever
else they
that
know
means.
everything, you know, I don't know.
There's always something to ask.
Yeah,
Yes,
I mean, I would
sure.
think so. I mean, this was the...
That's what you're doing, actually, basically.
Yeah, and I mean,
to
I know
ask.
when I was, translating, there's always that debate whether it's better to translate a living or a dead writer, because dead writers don't complain, but living writers, you get to ask them questions, you know. So
But do you complain? Never,
I never
ever.
complain. Of course not.
Sure.
I don't complain, but many writers are known for their
But
complaining.
let's talk again about angels and their tasks and functions. Why do these strange beings exist at all? You were talking about the task of guardian angels. I think this is quite clear, but others?
Yeah, and then they invent, well, I have a long litany in the book of all these angels, because basically every profession, I mean, there's now hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of named angels who are the patron saints of patron angels for all different kinds of, you know, any kind of profession that you have, you know, the guardian angel for moderators, or, you know, minors or anything. And then so why do all these angels exist? I think there's a there's a little problem with Christianity because because after all the predominant image of veneration in Christianity is a man being tortured, and so because of that, they were trying to humanize Christianity quite a bit in the early centuries, and that's when the whole cult of Mary comes in, and the Virgin Mary, and so there's a lot of veneration of the Virgin Mary, which comes later. Really, it's really not in the New Testament. And then the two main images of this object of veneration is either a tortured man or a baby. And it's very curious that Christianity, the image was not, for example, the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus as a teacher. So if imagine you're a Buddhist and you're used to looking at these, beautiful beatific images of the Buddha, and then you see Christ on the cross. It's kind of alarming. So I think that there's an attempt to humanize Christianity and to make it more in touch with us and with our lives in that sense, so that you have these kind of intermediaries between God and humanity, and so the angels then serve this function, and then there's a kind of movement against angels. Particularly in Protestantism. Protestantism doesn't know what to do with angels because they don't like angels. But on the other hand, angels are in the Bible, and so that they kind of don't, and they associate angels with the Catholic Church, so they don't like that. But they can't deny the existence of angels because angels do exist in the Bible. So they're in this very strange. It's hard to get a concrete answer about what Protestants. I actually asked. I know a young poet who's a minister, and I said, well, what's with Protestants and the angels? And he said, well, our policy is don't ask, don't tell.
So let's talk maybe about the different characters of angels. They're bad angels, dark angels, light angels. Nice angels.
Yeah, I mean, well, you have the angels who rebelled against God, and who are the fallen angels who are led by Satan, and even that is really a post-biblical elaboration, because the whole revolt of the angels, which then is only like 3 lines in the book of Revelation, so that Milton's great epic Paradise Lost is really an extrapolation of those 3 lines. And also I should say, just as a footnote, in Paradise Lost, not only do the angels eat, but they have digestive systems. And angels have sex in Paradise Lost, and they're gender fluid. So you have this revolt of the angels, which Jesus mentions once in passing, and then there's some lines in Book of Revelation about it. But most of that is also a kind of story that gets invented later. And the Book of Revelation is really something, because it's sort of like if somebody who knew the Bible by heart took LSD. And so it's this weird mashup of all of this imagery from the rest of the Bible in one text, and it's totally wild,
Let's talk about the illustrations.
Oh, okay, yeah. So in this
there
book,
are some in this book. Beautiful book.
It has very beautiful illustrations. Let me see if I can show you, which were, hang on a minute, I'll get you some nice ones.
Made by Mary Wellesley.
No, they're not made by her. She's the scholar.
I see.
These are they're from the 8th century. These are, so this is a guy, you can see some of these things. hold up. This is a guy named Frobenius Maurus, who is a German, who was the Archbishop of Mainz. Do you pronounce it Mainz?
Mm-hmm.
Mainz. Mainz in the 800s. And he wrote these series of poems that are all on a grid. Let me just find my favorite one here. They're all on, these are all, you can't see it, but these are all letters. And the poems are all written on a grid, and they're all, they're religious poems, and they're all numerological. And so they can be, they have to be interpreted in many different ways according to, but it's all mathematical, and they're actually, so they're kind of like concrete poems, but they all can be interpreted. And then Mary Wellesley, who is a medievalist, has a explanation of how you can, how to interpret all of these texts, and that's sort of as an appendix to the book.
And it's not a coffee stain on the title page, on the cover.
It's not a coffee stain. What
But
it is the.
It is?
No, it's okay. So the frontispiece looks like that, and it's actually the halo coming around him that bled into the other page, and then it's there.
Very nice. Thank you so much,
Thank
Eliot.
you.
Will there be a next project? Do you know already what to write about?
Yeah, well, I'm going in a few different directions. I wrote a fictional autobiography of Du Fu, the Tang Dynasty poet, and I just wrote a long thing about bees.
Never becomes boring.
What?
Never becomes boring.
Bees are never boring.
No.
I always have lots of things that I want to write. So.
Thank you so much
Oh,
being
thank
with
you.
us tonight. Eliot
Thank you.
Weinberger. Angels and Saints, liebes Publikum, mit denen können Sie jetzt, glaube ich, total beruhigt nach Hause gehen im Geiste und nächtigen. Und das Ganze ist bei New Directions erschienen und wir dürfen uns darüber freuen, nächstes Jahr, inshallah, bei Bärenberg. Übersetzt von Beatrice Faßbender. Hier gibt es doch noch eine Frage. Ja, sogar 2 Fragen. Mensch, 4 Fragen? Was ist denn jetzt plötzlich los? Gut, dann brauchen wir noch mal das Mikrofon, klar. Many questions.
Okay.
Kleiner Augenblick, da geht's los und wir brauchen das Mikrofon, weil das Ganze ja auch ein Stream ist.
Hello, thanks for that. I was just wondering, saints seem to have so much to do with healing. Did you notice in your research that as knowledge of medicine and healing changed and perhaps advanced, did the nature of who became a saint also change? And whether perhaps fewer people dealing with healing once, medicine came on the scene, essentially? So.
Oh, that's interesting, because most of the healing is always miraculous, so it's not scientific. So that's an interesting question. I haven't thought about that. I didn't get any sense that things had changed because, as I said, it's usually they're healing people who can't be healed by the doctors. So, yeah.
Thanks. Dankeschön. Wo ist das Mikrofon? Bitte.
Thank you so much. Very interesting. I wanted to ask you about what you think about. I think there's a need for angels somehow, because of course the church always used kind of the occurrence of an event or an angel or a saint for using it for their purposes, as you described. But I think there are actually, these are always stories which evolved from normal people, like normal people experienced something and they talked about it, and it became a big thing then. So somehow there seems to be a need for, for these beings in between gods or the god and the humans, and
Like,
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, you know, it's interesting because throughout human history, everything in the world was sacred. And, you know, trees were sacred, this was sacred. And you know, we lived in a world where basically every aspect of the world was sacred that one was a part of. And then you have what has been called, I think by Max Weber, the axial period, when basically the gods retreat to the skies. And so you have Greek gods, Christian God, Jewish God, Islamic God. They're all up there in the sky. And so they basically have kind of abandoned humanity to, just get on with their own, and once in a while they, will intercede. So I think that the angels do fulfill this need of being somewhere, as intermediaries between these gods who are in the sky and the sacrality of the world that we inhabit. So yeah, I think definitely, why not?
Gab es da mehrere Fragen? Einfach das Mikro rumreichen, wo die Hände aufploppen. Einfach reinsprechen. Den Rest machen wir.
Weil das ein Stream ist, sage ich das jetzt einfach mal auf Deutsch. Ich bin mir nicht so ganz darüber im Klaren, was die Motivation des Autors ist, warum er sich mit Engeln beschäftigt. Also davon abgesehen, dass es sie in der griechischen Tradition gibt und eigentlich schon in der ägyptischen Tradition beginnen. Also Engel ist nicht irgendwie etwas christlich-jüdisches, das wäre eine Verengung. Sie haben ja begonnen, über Kuriositäten, nach Kuriositäten zu fragen. Ja, ist das Buch, das uns gerade vorgestellt wurde, eine Kuriosität? Man könnte auch sagen, ja.
Also ich glaube, es hat nicht den Anspruch, ein lexikarisches Nachschlagewerk zu sein.
Ja,
aber am besten
aber
fragen
es
das
ist ja
den
doch
Autor.
auch spürbar, dass es durchaus ernsthafte theologische Aspekte gibt, die zur Sprache gekommen sind. Und ich bin mir eigentlich sehr unsicher, in welche Richtung das Buch geht. Gut, ich muss es ja erstmal lesen, aber war da eigentlich sehr, sehr gespannt darauf.
Hören wir mal, was der Autor selbst dazu sagt.
My books.
Whether it's the same kind of, collection of curiosities, or whether you dive more deeply into theological questions.
I'm not sure I can answer that. I don't really get deeply into the theological questions, and I certainly don't get into the philosophy of Aquinas or things like that in this book, because that's above me. So I'm more interested in the stories. So it's a kind of it's more like a book of stories, but not. I think curiosity is kind of it's not meant like that either. I mean, I think it takes all these stories seriously. Yeah.
Ich habe das
In the
Mikrofon.
back.
Mikro habe ich.
What?
Ich darf
Bitte.
sprechen. Yeah, thank you for this poetic and well, I think I go home and I have a really rare poetic night dreams, and so I like it. It's a lot of inspiration inside. I was wondering, I think it's more like a Western view on these angels. That was my, ich sag's mal einfach auf Deutsch. Also das war so die Sicht vielleicht aus so mehr so einer europäischen Sicht, eben so die Darstellung auf Engel. Und jetzt habe ich mich gefragt, wie die Welt die Engel wahrnimmt oder wie die Welt die Engel abbildet, ob es vielleicht ganz andere Abbildungen von Engeln gibt, die nicht zwei Flügel haben und klein und niedlich sind.
Wings and are very peaceful, maybe somewhere around the world and not in the rather Western tradition. Other images of angels. traditional ones with the.
Like in the Asian
with-
world or Mexican world, do they have
Do they all look
different
alike?
images from this?
Do they look
Do
different?
they look different?
No, well, I mean, first of all, in Islam they're different because in Islam the angels are pure light. You know, for starters, you don't have the same kind of idea of angels outside of the three monotheisms. I mean, there are flying beings, of course, in Buddhism, Hinduism, and so forth, but they're not exact. They don't have the same kind of role as angels, you know. But I think it's the Islam. Well, of course, Islam is against all kinds of graven images, and so the angels of Islam are pure light. So they don't have that same. They don't look the same. If that answers your question, I don't know.
Hi. Thank you so much for your talk. I've read your work, The Elemental Thing, and I really enjoy your writing. I have your book next to several other essayists who I'm very fond of, including Walter Benjamin, W. Sebald. I wondered if you could speak a little bit to, first of all, your influences and how you select topics.
Well, I mean, I select topics completely at random. I mean, it's just whatever I feel like, researching at that moment. So, and I can kind of know at this point something that I want to investigate further. Influence. Well, I mean, it was curious to discover that the essay form was still stuck in the 18th century, and that the essay form, with a few exceptions, never had an avant-garde the way poetry and fiction did. And so now we accept many different ways of writing poetry, different ways of writing fiction, but the essay is pretty much stuck in this first-person investigation of something. I wanted to find out about this, so then I found out blah, blah, blah. And that kind of narrative. And so it was interesting for me to try to write essays where, as I said, all the information is verifiable, but you're presenting it in completely different ways without that first-person narrative. So I'm not talking about myself, trying to find out about this subject or my thoughts on this subject. And very early on, as a teenager, I think the two people that gave me the possibilities of other ways of writing essays one was D.H. Lawrence has this book of criticism on American literature called Studies in American Literature, which is a totally crazy book, but it's kind of literary criticism as had never been written. And the other was Artaud. Antonin Artaud in The Theater and Its Double, and particularly he's writing a book about what theater should be, but he's starting with this plague ship that's coming into the harbor, so that was one of the things that kind of opened up my mind about the essay. The other, and then of course many poets, and through that. But, I don't really believe in influence. And it's very curious because some years ago, after my parents died, I found they had all of these papers I wrote in school. And when I was 12 years old, I wrote a report on fallout shelters, which was, at the time, was a big thing in America. People were digging in their backyards, making these things so that they could survive nuclear war. And I wrote this report on it, And what's interesting is that it's written in exactly the same style as I write now, and so you know, my vocabulary is a little better, and I'm a little more sophisticated. But I basically haven't changed since I was 12, and which, by the way, is W.H. Auden's definition of a minor writer, somebody whose style never changes. So I don't know about influence. You know, it seems like I was always doing exactly the same thing. You know, but obviously, you know, there were many things that kind of opened it up for me, and you know, kind of gave me permission to do what I'm doing.
Hello,
Way in the back there.
I think, yeah. Pass it on. Thank you so much. I'm interested in the spectral quality of saints, because they often die a violent death and afterwards are kind of present in another way than other humans that die are. You know, they can be patrons, you can ask them to help with stuff. And I'm interested in this kind of presence that lasts over death, which is, I think the church really wants to keep separated from ghosts and hauntings and everything. So what do you think about that? How do they stay that weirdly present?
Well, yeah, that gets into the whole medieval thing about relics. And as you know, many churches have relics of saints. They'll have the finger bone, and you know, and then or a lot of churches claim that they have the same finger bone and so forth. So that there is a whole cult of relics in the Catholic Church, and of course there, you know, endless miracles attached to those relics or to the tombs of those saints, but that's in a different category, I think, from the idea of ghosts, really, and they don't appear. But there is this. Well, there's this strange. Okay. A lot of people reported seeing saints. This is, we're talking about in the medieval period. And then there's this very important moment in 800 and something where this guy is sleeping outside a church of Saint somebody, I can't remember. And this figure appears to him and says, "Do you know who I am?" And he says, "Well, you must be Saint," whoever it was. And he says, "No, I'm actually the Archangel Michael." And this was actually considered a very important event, because the saints are not supposed to, first of all, Augustine had said that the dead have nothing to do with the living, that they're just off in another world, and that also the dead are not going to be resurrected until the day of judgment. So there was this question of how are all these saints who are dead appearing to all of these people? But then when this figure that appeared to this guy identified himself as the Archangel Michael, they decided that it's actually the angels impersonating saints who had appeared. And this solved an important theological conundrum. And so it seems like a kind of minor event to us, but this was like major. So that's how they got around that one. I think way in the back there are some questions too.
Yeah, that's true. There are many questions actually.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me? Thank you for the speech. And I had a spontaneous question based on you said that when people see the Buddha, and in the Buddhism and in Christian they see the crucified. So I'm curious. Once I was having a meal with my Arabic friends and Indian friend, and they both pray before the meal. And so in Arabic culture they say Bismillah, which is let the demon go away. Don't poison them in the meal. But in India they say that what I take, it's like thank God to protect us for the food. So I wondered, and it's like in the how to say. I wondered how the culture was shaped this difference, and from your research, does the geography or landscape influence the different angel, like shape the different characters?
Does the landscape? Sorry, I'm just trying to get this question. Does the landscape
circumstances shape a character?
Shape the character of a religion?
Yeah, because with
an angel.
Yikes.
Sophisticated question.
Yeah, I mean that's well, I mean, first of all, you know, what's very curious is that the three great monotheisms really come out of, you know, a bunch of funky shepherds in the desert, you know, and it's so much of it is, you know, especially, you know, when you read in the Old Testament, when you read Leviticus, there's all of these laws that, like, if two guys are fighting and one grabs the other guy's balls, then you have to cut his hands off, and so forth and so on. I mean, so, you know, we're really talking about a bunch of shepherds there, and so it's always been curious to me how people are fundamentalists about the Bible, because, you know, we're obviously don't own slaves and have courtesans, and we don't sacrifice rams and all of that sort of stuff. So I mean, there's certainly a case to be made that the monotheisms are the product of a kind of desert mentality that then, of course, gets refined, you know, over the centuries as it moves out of the desert. Whether is Buddhism really a product of the forest? I don't know. I mean, it's you know, that's kind of a profound question, right? I think I mean, certainly the landscape of China has been influential on Taoism. Can you say that the landscape of China is also influential on Confucianism? Possibly, you know, I don't know. It's a deep question. I think you have to study this. It's a good question. You have to study this for many years and maybe come back to us in about 25 years with the result of your investigations. Yeah.
Ganz hinten. Oder wer hat das Mikrofon gerade? Gibt es das irgendwo?
Thank you so much. I think you have touched about this thing a little bit, but is the concept of angel always related to religion, or in your research, have you ever found that well, the concept of angel doesn't have always to be related to religion?
Oh yeah, well, like 1950s rock and roll. I mean, it's like every song is about angels, right? So yeah, I mean, obviously it's filtered down into this, you know, into more secular concerns, shall we say, than that. But I don't know what else. Are you thinking of something else, or nope?
Thank you.
Hi, hello.
Over there? Oh.
I remember watching a film about the trial of Joan of Arc, and how she was, during the trial, she was charged against, or for heresy, and every night these angels would appear to her, and but also besides these appearances, she would also be in constant communication with them. So that means she also recognized which angels she was talking to or talking at, and also seeking help from them to confirm her faith. And after, like, these priests would come to her room and ask her if she had changed her mind, and she would say, "No, I've talked to this angel, like, and that angel, and no, I still believe in this. My faith is firm." And I think also to be able to do that, you, like she did, one also has to know to which angel one's talking to, because like angels can appear, but they could also appear really abstractly. But if you know which angel appears to you and consults you, you really get a more tangible idea about what you should do. And if you know, if I would read your book, would I like have a better concept of the abilities of these angels?
Yeah, well, Joan of Arc was in touch with the archangel Michael, I believe, who's the angel of warriors and soldiers, you know, particularly in the Middle Ages. I've got in my book, I've got a long litany of different angels who are patrons of different kinds of things. So you could possibly find your, you know, somebody to call when you're a name, you know, you could. I don't know, but
somebody who fits.
Someone who fits,
concern.
you know, your perfect angel. Your perfect angel is waiting for you right here.
So one last question, then we have to close. Actually, here's a question.
Is there a special advantage of becoming a saint, or I mean?
Well, you're usually dead, though. You know, that's the problem. I mean, so you don't get any.
Is there a hierarchy in heaven?
Advantages, you know. What?
Is there a hierarchy in heaven? And a second question: what is the motivation when you want to become a saint? You likely become a martyr. So, is there a special relief in heaven for that?
No, well, you're not. I mean, the saints aren't martyrs anymore, really, because I mean, in early Christianity, most of the saints were martyred. You do have to be dead to become a saint, though, so you don't have any special advantage here, you know. So you don't get a discount anywhere or anything. But what?
In heaven, maybe.
In heaven, yeah. Well, then that gets into this question of when do you go to heaven, which is also greatly debated, because originally they used to say that that even if you're good, you don't go to heaven until the day of judgment, and at which point. The dead are all resurrected, and then we live in the New Jerusalem for 1,000 years or something, and then we ascend to heaven. But they said the exception was made for saints; they get to go to heaven right away. Then it also gets complicated with purgatory, because purgatory gets invented. It's not in the Bible. It gets invented in 1200. And purgatory is kind of this waiting room before you get on the train to heaven. And then it was believed that there were all of these souls in purgatory, which was in the story of Vijay. And the people on earth have to pray for those souls in purgatory. And if enough people pray for them, then they will finally be able to ascend to heaven. Once you get to heaven, I don't think there's a particular hierarchy. I mean, there's a hierarchy of angels, which was also invented. In fact, that's a whole other story, which I talk about here. But the whole level of hierarchy with the cherubim and seraphim and so forth, that was invented in the 4th century by this guy named Pseudo-Dionysius, who created this whole idea of the celestial hierarchy. And in fact, he invents the word hierarchy for. So in heaven, it's now, you know, assumed that there's this hierarchy of angels who all have different duties and stuff. But that gets invented quite late too, and it's also not in the Bible. I mean, it's what I was trying to say. It's amazing how little about the angels is actually in the Bible. And then it becomes these stories that get elaborated and elaborated and elaborated, particularly from the time of Augustine in the 4th century to Aquinas, and I think 1200 is one of the great is the great moment for like angelology.
Well, after so many questions, I have the feeling that there's a need actually for someone who explains all this. So maybe you can get a new job explaining everything about angels and saints. Eliot Weinberger,
Okay,
thank you so much. Und wenn Sie weitere Fragen haben, Eliot Weinberger ist noch kurz da und signiert. Und zwar im Foyer, im großen Haus. Tschüss, gute Nacht. Danke für Ihr Kommen und Interesse. Bye bye.